Hello and welcome to Minter Dialogue, episode number 468. My name is Minter Dial and I'm your host for this podcast, a proud member of the Evergreen Podcast Network. For more information or to check out other shows on the network, please visit evergreenpodcast.com. So this week's interview is with Michele Nevarez. Michele is CEO of Beyond EI, providing customized tools and a wide range of learning programs that are based on emotional intelligence. Beyond EI's mission is to democratize the practical application and wisdom of emotional intelligence to effect positive change and bring about the best in ourselves, each other, and our time together on this planet. Michele is author of the new book, Beyond Emotional Intelligence, a guide to accessing your full potential, published by Wiley. In this conversation with Michele, we discuss her journey becoming CEO of Beyond EI, her work with the legendary Daniel Goleman, conscious awareness, empathy, how to rewire the brain, and how to turn non-believers of the power of EI into believers. You'll find all the show notes on minterdial.com. Please do consider to drop in your rating and review, and don't forget to subscribe to catch all the future episodes. Now for the show. Michele Nevarez, un placer, a pleasure to have you on your show, my show. So I wanted to get you on because you've just finished this book, written this book, Beyond Emotional Intelligence, a guide to accessing your full potential. Seems like a most worthy book for these times today. You're also the CEO of Beyond EI, Beyond Emotional Intelligence. So you've had a very varied career, and I would love for you to recount us your journey towards becoming the CEO of Beyond EI and what might have been the pivotal moments. And I wanted to take one quote out of your book. What constipating memories do you have that led you to become the CEO of Beyond EI?
I love that you picked that quote. That was the toned down version.
Your editor accepted this one.
Yes, exactly. And I always tease that the 200 pages I had to redact. That's actually, those are the juiciest bits of the book. Those are the outtakes, so to say, with the real stories, but anyway, I feel like I've been on a pretty circuitous life journey that has many unexpected dips and turns, but ultimately, I would say there are three factors that led me to start the business that I'm in today. And first and foremost would be sort of my non-traditional background in Tibetan Buddhism. I was a religion major as an undergrad, and after I graduated at Bryn Mawr, I moved to Nepal, and I helped start a university focused on Tibetan Buddhist philosophy and meditation, and that university is still going today.
Nice.
It's called Rangjung Yeshi Institute, which in Tibetan means self-existing wakefulness. And that is really the essence of my work today relative to what it is we have influence over, which is sort of this core question that's driven me both personally and professionally for, well, I guess I'm 49 years old now. So
a good long conscious time.
Right. Or unconscious, as the case may be, for part of that, I suppose. But and then I did a stint in what I call corporate life and worked across various industries. I was teased that I picked the industry that had a knack for going on its ear while I was in it, whether that was .com and consulting or investment management in the 08-09 crash, healthcare at the onset of Obamacare, and yada, yada. So, but ultimately, I realized as I was working in these constipating positions, the more senior level I got, the less of a fit it really was for me personally, and the less gratifying the work. So I took a bit of a detour and worked with Dr. Richie Davidson for about 4 years prior to this venture I'm in now, which was a big, beautiful eye-opener for the work that I'm doing today.
Beautiful. I imagine there'd be a fun story within that. And so I wanted to ask you a sort of I don't know, it's maybe a first level question, which is, do you think everyone is or can be good at their heart, at their core? Or maybe if I could add one more piece, or is being bad not a necessary part of our existence?
Great questions, both of them. I not only personally believe we are good at the core, but it would seem, even from a neuroscience standpoint, that there is compelling evidence to suggest that at our core we are good. And that we have at least good, we need to define good, right? But pro-social behaviors, behaviors that work in service of and benefit for others. But as to your second question, I think we learn things in contrast to other things. And so there are these, I kind of live and think in spectrums of behavior. And so bad is a relative concept, depending on context and so many other factors. And so I think of it a little bit like the texture that helps us understand the bigger picture.
I studied women's studies when I was at university, and part of that we would look at groupings, 5-year-olds together, 5-year-old girls, 5-year-old boys, 5-year girls and boys, and looking at how those interactions were. And then, of course, even earlier, what behaviors were going. And I kind of pit good and bad. Of course, if you don't know what bad is, you don't get good. And I've a strong feeling that within our conflicting selves or our paradoxes that live within us, at the core, there is the individual and then the group to which I belong. And if I'm too much subsumed by the group to which I belong, the individual doesn't exist. And I kind of relate on one level, the individual to the community, good to bad, selfish gene or whatever, if you want to go to the Hawkins kind of, or Dawkins, perspective, or life and death, with death being some finity that we have trouble getting to grips with, and seems to be the darkness. And let's hope that life is the lightness. But at some level, we always know that the darkness is there. And is it not possible that we inherently, intrinsically have to have within us bad and good?
Well, I tend to think about these things in terms of what are we intrinsically versus what is a vehicle that we use to move through this world, essentially as embodied consciousness. And so good and bad are not only concepts and constructs, but they're highly contextual, meaning you could define them in any number of ways. I like to sort of lay a stake in the ground relative to this idea of benefiting or harming another person or oneself. It seems as good a stake as any, logical, practical, even
visible at some level,
even visible at some level,
measurable somehow.
Yes.
That has done bad to somebody.
Exactly. And so, but all other constructs, apart, for example, that definition of good and bad, are socially constructed and learned behaviors by and large. And so I think, having a kind of a tight definition that we could agree on is helpful, because everything else is truly, like I said, it's part of what we learn from the moment really we're in the womb. We have modeled to us what is correct in this situation, what is incorrect. And in the absence of experience or having had something modeled or lived before, then we're going to look to those around us to see what do I do here? How do I behave? So I guess what I'm trying to say is that I don't know that these things are intrinsic as much as they are an output of being an embodied consciousness moving through space and time, seemingly.
This is my filter through which I'm observing the world, if you will. And I think in the way that we have navigated, you use the word vehicle, have gone through the existential crisis, what I believe, for the pandemic, and is somehow being reflected also in what we have seen going on in Ukraine.
Yeah.
We are being forced to understand more about our finitude in a world where we've been always getting older, dying later, pushing off death cryogenically, whatever we can to have immortality. Whereas this mortality thing is pretty real. And there's no abstraction to that. I mean, it is a very real experience when you talk about happening to you. And I feel we've, as a society, this is where I feel we've lost touch with that. And if good is all we look for, in other words, we don't embrace the bad, then it kind of gets dystopian or distended anyway, because we're not able to accept who we really are, which includes some intrinsic bad. That's sort of my understanding. And I would love for you to, layer into that. Of course, disagree as you wish, Michele.
Well, first of all, I love the topic of death. There isn't a day that goes by in my life where I don't think about death multiple times throughout the day, and especially before bed at night. So I love the topic. We could totally talk about that. I don't know if I think there's something intrinsically bad. I think, my position really is that the smallest common denominator of what we each have intrinsic to ourselves, as well as available by way of our own, what I'll call agency or ability to choose, is our awareness. And it simply becomes a matter of connecting with that awareness and being able to maneuver it in such a way that we would actually have agency. That takes practice. And frankly, I think even a lifetime isn't enough of practice. I think the bad pieces, so to say, are simply a function of how we are most habituated to perceive reality. And that is subject and object. Everything is in relationship to the physicality of who we are in this life and our body by necessity, because we have to be able to navigate reality, both physically and psychologically. So of course, there is a subject-object duality in place, even how our senses are set up. So awareness, on the other hand, does not have to be geared in that self-other type dynamic. It has the capacity to be aware of itself. And that is our superpower, if you ask me.
Well, at some level, it's the meeting, the congruence between those, perhaps the duality and that basket, which is me, and to have that awareness. So looking at your book, Beyond EI, I thought of a subtitle for it, which is How to Rewire the Brain. I wanted you to react to my subtitle.
Well, the title's the funniest part about my book. I mean, I am humorous, but the how we derived the title, because I had really very little to do with it. So
I know how that goes with publishers.
Oh my Lord. I felt like, could we at least make it a little bit more what the book is about? And I negotiated like hell for it and lost. And then at the last moment, I had a decision I could make finally, because it was called Emotionally Intelligent Habits, with the same subtitle for the most of the life of the book until the last week before it went to print, because of all of these changes with my company and the work I'm doing. Sure. But look, I love your subtitle for the book. I I believe with all of my being that we are constantly shaping our brains with what we think, say, do again and again. We have so many hidden patterns of perception, which is really the essence of what I've tried to write about. We think about outer habits, right? And we have, beautiful work that's been done in this space by people like James Clear, for example, whose work I love, by the way. And yet we don't talk about often the thing that allows us to make habit change, which is this linchpin of awareness. And so I've tried to write the counterpart to what are those inner perceptual habits of how we process our reality again and again without even really realizing what we're doing or having a conscientiousness about it.
Well, I definitely want to get into that, Michele. But I wanted to say another thing, which it struck me as I was reading your book, the Serenity Prayer, and which refers to God, but that's not to whom I say it. It's to me. Grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference.
Beautiful.
How much of that is relevant to this rewiring, this ability to influence and change?
I think it's hugely, hugely relevant because from as best I can tell, and as best as my hypothesis, so to say, of what we have influence over works, we have so many choices. And so we have to figure out ultimately what is that litmus or measuring stick by which we will make these choices. And so when we look at all of the things we really can't influence, which is quite a lot, actually, even the things we have the perception we are the mastermind behind, science might suggest otherwise, that a lot happens on a pre-conscious basis. And so I think when we really look at what our choices are with regard to what we have influence over, half the battle is figuring out what we want. What are our value set that we're going to make these decisions by, how we're going to show up in the world, what's important to us. So I love the prayer. And I think we all would do well to consider more deeply, what are the mental models and beliefs that are guiding, usually on a pre-conscious or habitual basis, what we show up and do each day, how we read the world.
In that awareness, that is that ability to identify the patterns and to check, oh, that is a habit, or that is a thought that I have, and to be able to step a step away from yourself to observe that thinking. So really, when I think of reading your book, I kind of got the feeling, and I'm going to make a parallel with another book that I absolutely adored back in the day. It was called You Just Don't Understand: Men and Women in Conversation. And it was a remarkable book. And I had such fun discussing it with the 16 other female students in my class. But they all read it and they said, well, yeah, we get that. Yeah, we understand. The people who need to read it, the other ones, los hombres. And so with your book, there's this feeling I have, well, there are the people who already are, they've got their conscious awareness, they're sort of layering into it. And like you say, best you can, maybe takes more than a lifetime to get it all, but you're doing your best. You're doing pretty much on the case. You might've gone to Tibet, you studied some Buddhism and so on. Then you have the people who are ready. I want to get into that in a second, but then really the problem is the people who aren't ready, who actually need to read it the most.
Yeah.
So how do we get them in on this gig? Because if I'm already open and I'm in it, then I'm a fast track. I'm going to read your book. I'm going to devour it. Cool. But at some level, the issue is, what's the argument that's going to help these people who are stuck in their ways, acting like monsters or bad bosses or unhappy people at work? And, oh, well, that's just the way it is, or that's the way I have to be.
Sure. Yeah, that is the $1 million question.
Not just
But
for
it's
book sales.
right. No, right. No, not at all. In fact, it's really the heart of my business, and our trying to explain this work in a way that can be understood by someone who has no aspiration to become emotionally intelligent, let alone consciously aware, or whatever the case may be. And somehow, when you were asking the question, I thought about the conflict that's going on right now in Ukraine, with Russia, and where I imagine Putin would be coming from mentally. I somehow equated the two, but anyway, I think we each have to have a motivation to do anything we do that requires effort. And this is this work that I do and that I'm trying to teach people about requires a lot of effort, and therefore a lot of either inherent interest in believing that this is worthwhile, or some motivation. So I always like to sort of give this example around what causes a person to embark and then sustain the momentum needed for behavior change. And my belief about it is that it's like a candle that we hold in our hand. And if we put our other hand on the top of the candle quite tightly, we're going to feel burned and we'll want to remove our hand quite quickly. There's an impetus, there's a motivation, there's a pain, so to say. It's a symbol, really, a metaphor.
Sure.
For the circumstances that need to come together just so in our life to be motivated to do things we wouldn't otherwise be interested in doing. But most of the time, the metaphor is not quite like that. It's more that our hand is just enough above the flame to be something we can adjust to the discomfort of, but isn't enough to actually motivate the level of effort, sustained effort, needed to make meaningful change in any area, not just this area, but any area where any kind of learning, skill development, behavior, or habit is involved. So this is all to say we can't make other people be interested. And unless we take it to the language of, do you care what you have influence over? Do you want to have influence in your own life in as many ways as possible? That's been the only door in that I've been creative enough to think about, which I don't know that it's that creative, by the way, but it seems an obvious door in.
So many people ask me how I felt when George Floyd was killed. And as I sit across a table from a black man who's about to talk about how the murder of another black man felt, I don't think it really matters how I feel.
Hello, I'm Stephen Dorsey, host of Black and White from Evergreen Podcasts. We'll explore and explain how white advantage, bias, and outright discrimination continues to plague our society. Black and White is available wherever you listen to podcasts.
So in my worldview, I'm thinking that a lot of these individuals typically are sitting in positions of power and have gotten there through a methodology and successfully, great.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But one of the ways that they are typically primed to think is, well, what's the output? What's the result?
Right.
What is your Valhalla in all this? All right, I do a little hard
Love it.
work and then what? You know,
Right.
what's the
What do I
transactional
get then?
benefit? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, look, for me, we could talk about transactional benefit within any context, but simply put, I think it would be the ability to have choicefulness in one's own life over the things you actually have the ability to influence. And so if you equate this back to sort of real world activity, it's, do you like the outcomes you're getting? Do you like the quality of relationships you have in your life, both at work and home? Do you like the results you're getting? And if the answer is no, then surely there must be a cause for why you're not getting those results. And so my work takes that back down to, again, what is it that we intrinsically can have agency over within ourselves to be able to set ourselves on a trajectory to be best positioned to get the kinds of outcomes and relationships we ultimately want to have. Certainly no guarantee. We're not the only variable, but it sure is increasing the odds.
And I suspect that people who are lost or unhappy can see that there's an idea of a benefit. Oh, if I do this, maybe I can achieve a higher level of happiness. Great. The work that I do is most often with senior executives, and their impact on a culture and the, let's say, fulfillment anyway of their employees is so important.
Yeah.
And what I kind of see is that these are the people who actually maybe say, well, oh, look at me. I've got my houses, I've got my 3 wives, and lots of cars, and people think of me as the boss. So back to your points, what are my relationships? Well, I've had lots of love in my life. I've got people who have high esteem for me. I look at the houses and the chateaus and cars I have. And then when they get to another age, and all of a sudden they look around and I'm no longer the CEO. And actually, I don't really like these hangers on. And I'm not so thrilled with the life I've made. And then they still may need to go out and buy another Ferrari and change lives. But these individuals need to have a wake-up call that says, actually what you've been doing, the path that you've been leading to get to where you are needs to change now, not when you're unhappy. Because what you can do is you can affect other people's changes and allow them to bring in themselves and be more themselves. So these are the people I think are the hardest to reach because they're high and mighty, and my ego's huge, and I'm not listening.
Yeah. And that's the example really of the candle, right? They need a crucible moment, a hand very close to the candle, something that really shifts, causes them to move off their position. That or so much mental discomfort or dis-ease for them to want to do something about it. And, if they believe that it is possible actually to create an internal world, mental states that are conducive, irrespective of outer circumstances or all the belongings they may have or all of the status, et cetera, when it starts to feel a little shaky on the inside, and that's not something they can do anything about, that can also be an impetus for doing this work. But often, to your point, short of one or more of those things happening, it often just doesn't happen because we still live in a world that rewards success at all costs, where we haven't yet reached the stage of business as fully agents of world benefit. And so we're still, a little upside down with regard to the value proposition of what people have been allowed to create without consequence.
Yeah, I think if you look at the word good, I make a good living. That's sort of the level of good that we've got.
There you go. Yeah. Yeah.
So, Michele, you've been doing this work for quite a while. You've had your moments in corporate life, and which is why I wanted to lean into this component of it, because I'm sure you've seen that up close. Do you feel that at some level in the world, in Western world anyway, perhaps in Tibet too, I don't know, that we've kind of hit a crucible moment in the world? Or has this moment just been coming along and simmering along a long time, and today we're talking about it because you just launched a book? Or do you really feel that there's an opportunity that we're actually at a decision mode where things will go, as you use, I think you use, the pear shape, more worse shape than where, really things could explode if we don't really do this work?
Yeah. I think there comes a time when when we do hit these sort of critical moments, and I do believe we are at a critical juncture in more than one way, with the environment, with what's happening right now in Ukraine, where we can see that we still live in a world where democracies can be demolished right in front of the rest of the world's eyes, with no real plan to figure this out. And so I think the inflection point and what tech actually has done to accelerate, exacerbate, highlight where we've each arrived at, I think, is this place of incredible mental distraction, incredible mental dis-ease or unease, that creates a kind of restlessness that is now bubbling up in all shapes and forms. Mental illness, PTSD, all of these nuances where we actually have to be with ourselves and realize it. So I think, the people who wake up and realize this is not the life I want to be leading, and I'm not going to lead it this way anymore, then that momentum creates, it undermines the foundation that most corporations have relied on and been based on for generations, which is this idea that we can do profit at all costs, that we can do short-term shareholder gains without really looking at the downstream impacts of our actions. I think those days will hopefully be up soon. I also know that people love money and things that are extrinsic motivators. So I don't know what it will take, and I don't know if we won't destroy ourselves quicker than the reverse happens. I'm not convinced. I don't know one way or the other. I don't know.
One of the things that struck me, Michele, as I was reading your book was the notion that what goes for the individual goes for the society as far as the solution is concerned, or that's how I paraphrase. Can you explain to me that thought?
Yeah, sure. So I don't believe we can create systems that are any smarter than how we're each geared individually to perceive reality. And so, people create businesses, people create policies and governments and systems of government.
And artificial intelligence.
Absolutely. And so we create in many ways a reflection of where we're at as individuals. And yet what's so fascinating is that what creates the individual actually in real terms, in terms of what we understand about the neuroscience piece of perception and emotion, are very much what we've learned from our social influences. And of course, we know that's not just our closest family, but the many contexts that we each have growing up throughout our lives. And so that is the way the collective deeply imprints and impacts the individual. But we cannot undo that, I believe, except at an individual level, on an innermost level. You're not going to do that work for me. I can read a brilliant book, and that's awesome. That's intellectual understanding. But unless I'm really going to change something for myself by way of how I perceive reality, make sense of reality, and then act on that perception and understanding, then no part of my output will be different. It will just simply be a collective reflection of what I've learned and or what I'm doing unconsciously. So I really think it's a both and proposition. And I'm not sure that one or the other could be fully done in an acceptable way, in an improved way. Yeah, without sort of that bidirectional influence that we have.
So again, probably like everything, as I listen to you, I'm sort of trying to analyze myself and observe my biases as I go into this. But I've tried to also be explicit about my biases.
Sure.
So I come from Europe, where at least I spent most of my life over here. And the story goes, I used to run a lot. I was very athletic and staying in shape. I'd go for runs, and every once in a while I'd come back and the front of my bottom part of my legs, the shins, would hurt.
Yeah.
And oh well, oh damn, all right, get over it.
Mm.
Then I got to America, and I went to a school in America, and I went on a run because I was still being athletic, and I came back. Oh damn, it hurts. What hurts? Well, this part of my. Oh, you have shin splints. I was told. I have what? There's a name for it. It's called shin splints. Oh my goodness. And my observation was the naming of something made it bigger. And therefore I had a right to complain about it because, I have this thing called shin splints. And that was the beginning of a long discovery of other things that I didn't know existed, or at least didn't have a name when I was brought up. And today we've got to such a point where mental health is so rampantly off the charts bad.
Yeah.
Great things are within this. I did a film in the Second World War, so I've interviewed many, many veterans who came back from war, and this concept of PTSD. I get it.
Yeah.
At the same time, if you talk to the World War II veterans, this was not a vocabulary that they had, and they just said, basically their idea was get on with it. You have dirt on your knees. We don't have a name for that.
Yeah.
That's called messing around. That's called life.
Yeah.
And to the extent that we've gone into this naming of everything thing, it's actually not me. It's a label. It's this other thing. And then I can take a pill to fix that thing.
Right.
As opposed to maybe looking a little bit more systemically at it as part of life. And actually life is challenge and the way you overcome the challenge, as opposed to putting a sticker and getting a blue pill.
Yeah. I couldn't agree with you more. There are many methods for working with one's emotions and mental states. Most of which, by the way, for most of us are temporary. And coming from the Buddhist philosophy and background, we don't label the marbles. And if the marbles are thoughts, feelings, emotions, they're just mental movement. When you get into labeling, you're going to be labeling a while. And you can get caught up in the labels, you can get caught up in this and that. And it's a whole world of distraction and elaboration in and of itself. Or we could just dump out all the marbles. And we could, in the sort of metaphor of thinking or any kind of temporary mental movement, of which all thought, emotion, sensations are, they go away. So we can pay attention, we can learn their texture, we can name it 200 different things. I don't care. But it doesn't necessarily mean it will stop it from coming back. So I think the king of all methods, or queen, is to notice the mind that experiences the movement and sever it at its root. Now, you may have to do that a lot, but it's a different method. And so what really resonated with me about what you said is that my youngest son was diagnosed with autism at quite an early age. We never said the word around him. And I'm not saying I didn't educate myself, but we didn't use labels because I felt that he would behave to the label. He is a tremendous young man, and irrespective of any progress or accomplishment he would or would not have made, wouldn't change my feeling about this. I made a concerted choice not to label, and I think he's a hell of a lot better off for it. And that's just our personal kind of history around that particular label. And if you met him, you just wouldn't know any of that. You wouldn't know any of that. So I agree with you. And yeah.
Well, thanks for sharing. And it makes me think, of course, inciting people to read the way your intro with your grandmother, Harriet, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
What a character she
Right?
must have been. Oh my goodness. And
Yes.
so many kids, and then your grandfather who went to the Second World War.
Yeah.
And what that means for one's life. I certainly saw that up close myself. Wanted to, I guess I had so many other questions. I really wanted to get into empathy, because that's a big topic for me. You talk about it a fair number of times in the book, but
Yeah.
the last thing really to leave us with is, right, yeah, get yourself conscious awareness, get to know who you are. How do you know when you know who you
Yeah.
are?
Good point. Well, I think this is what my whole life's journey has been about. And I'll take it back to a story of the first time I met my teacher, who is still my teacher today. His name is Chokanima Rinpoche. And I met him in Bodh Gaya, India, when I was doing this academic study abroad program in my 20s. And he had come at the end of the program after we'd learned a bit about meditation and the different schools of Buddhist thought. And he every night he'd give these really detailed instructions, meditation instructions. And I'm a kind of learner where I like to write everything down, can't miss a beat, right? But at some point, my pen ran out of ink. And he saw this, and he could see this was very troubling to me, because he's continuing to teach. And he reached inside of his robe and pulled out his pen, and he threw it to me. And I caught it. And I didn't just catch the pen, but it was very much the moment where I feel that I caught a glimpse of what I like to call the natural face of our own mind, our own awareness, free from elaboration, just as it is, albeit for a very short period of time. But I could never really unsee it. And so now my whole life has just been a practice of connecting again and again with short glimpses of who we are naturally without effort. We don't have to cultivate anything. We just have to observe and use that superpower that we all intrinsically have.
That moment of catching the pen, it seems like there was a sort of a spark at that moment.
Yeah. There was a new kind of seeing.
I personally think psychedelics are a tremendous way of opening that door to understanding who you are in a context, the littleness of us in a world, which helps to get rid of, or at least diminish some of the ego, not get rid of it, because we need the ego.
Sure.
Otherwise we'd have no explorers, right? But the idea of who we are, of course, it's abstract and it's never perfect. It's certainly never a full 100% view. However, making that part of your journey maybe is the most important thing to do, is get on that track and allow for honest feedback and somehow get into reading your book, Michele. So how can people follow you, or of course get the book? What would be the ways you'd like to sign off on this?
Yeah, thank you. So the book is available really at all major outlets, Amazon being kind of the bigger of them all. But also, if you're interested in connecting with me, with my work, beyondei.inc is our website, and we have handles on all the major social media outlets. And you can also reach out to me personally. I have also all the same, Michele Nevarez, and happy to connect
ELE,
and talk about
Michele,
the work.
ELE.
Yes, 1L, Michele, my belle.
Très bien. With that, huge thank you. Michele, beautiful. Thank you so much for doing that.
Thank you so much.
That was a studio audience. We will be in touch. Thanks for having listened to this episode of the Minter Dialogue podcast. If you like the show and would like to support me, please consider a donation on patreon.com/MinterDial. You can also subscribe on your favorite podcast service. And as ever, rating and reviews are the real currency for podcasts. You'll find the show notes with over 2,000 and more blog posts on minterdial.com. Check out my documentary film and 4 books, including my last one, You Lead, How Being Yourself Makes You a Better Leader. And to finish, here's a song I wrote with Stephanie Singer, A Convinced Man.
A stranger tucked around me, precipitating the danger. To feel free, trust is the reason. Still I won't toe the line. I sit here passively, hope for your respect, anticipating the thrill of your intellect. Maybe I tell myself there's no use in me lying. I'm a convinced man, building an urge. I'm a convinced man, to live and die submerged. A convinced man, in the arms of a woman. I'm a convinced man, challenge my fate. I'm a convinced man, competition's innate. A convinced man, in the arms of a woman. Despise revenges and struggle with deceit. Live for the challenge so life's not incomplete. What's wrong with challenge? I know soon we all die. I like the feel of a stranger tucked around me, precipitating the danger. To feel free, trust in my reason, and let me show you why. I'm a convinced man, practicing my lines. I'm a convinced man, here in these confines. A convinced man, in the arms of a woman. I'm a convinced man, admit to the test. I'm a convinced man, I'm ready for an arrest. I'm a convinced man, in the arms of a woman.
So many people ask me how I felt when George Floyd was killed. And as I sit across a table from a black man who's about to talk about how the murder of another black man felt, I don't think it really matters how I feel.
Hello, I'm Stephen Dorsey, host of Black and White from Evergreen Podcasts. We'll explore and explain how white advantage, bias, and outright discrimination continues to plague our society. Black and White is available wherever you listen to podcasts.